Hey, number ones. Are you stuck in the Matrix? That's a very good question. How about we check it out?
Rome's success was built on diversity. In diversity, Romans often expressed bigoted views about foreigners. This inclusivity, diversity, diverse mix of peoples and backgrounds, and white is just an all-around poor choice, are not fairly described as European. So the idea that Romans were white is simply not supported by evidence. It distorts history. I don't say this for political reasons. This is what happened. Are you getting upset listening to this? Does it bother you? Can the Roman Republic be fairly described as European?
Today we are reviewing and responding to a video produced by Dr. Miano, host of the channel World of Antiquity. The video in question, published on the 27th of March 2025, is titled Blue Pill Rome versus Red Pill Rome. As a channel that centers on Roman history as one of the main constituents of the content I produce, I decided to create an analysis and breakdown of this production of his. As per the description of the author, the video falls within the debunking category. Hence, as part of this structured analysis today, we will identify the notions the doctor purports to debunk, address the debunking methodology, and correct any sections which we, as a team, feel was misrepresenting ancient Roman past, while at the same time agreeing with any statement we believe to be correct. As it will be very clear, Dr. Miano and I assume polar opposite positions when it comes to the description of the ancient Romans and the truth. However, I do wish to point out that up to this point, all of our interactions online have always been cordial. This is not an attack ad personam, I'm here just to attack his arguments. And while I will be ruthless in attacking his arguments, I will also try to maintain a spirit of civility in the presence of contrasting intellectual positions. For full context, I would like to underline that Dr. Miano referred this video to me himself on X through a private message and asked me what my thoughts were about this presentation. And with that being said, Dr. Miano, the floor is yours.
You think you've taken the red pill. You think you've woken up to the truth about history. But what if I told you you're still plugged into the Matrix? What if I told you that everything you've been parroting about Rome is just another illusion?
The Romans and Greeks were ancient. Everyone in Latium was white or founders of Roman kingdom, the German barbarians.
These are the takes of people who believe they've broken free, that they see the world as it really is. But in reality, they've swallowed a comfortable modern myth, a blue pill version of Rome that never actually existed.
Between 22 to 27 seconds in, we see a variety of comments on screen, I suspect from under his videos, where people present ideas which, as described, represent the side that is in the wrong, believing the myths, having ingested the blue pill, so to speak. We will review these one by one later, but for now let's just have an overall idea of what is being allegedly debunked. Ancient Romans from Latium, obviously white Europeans. State of Rome, the closest thing to a European civilization state. Young children weren't trans. Even in pagan Rome, marriage was between male and female. There were two genders. The Romans and Greeks were European, once again. Well, let's see.
You really want to know what happened? Do you actually want the red pill? Then buckle up, because I'm about to take you down the rabbit hole.
Rabbit hole it is. Follow the right rabbit. I hope it's not one of those medieval ones, am I right?
If you've seen The Matrix, you know the idea. Take the blue pill, and you stay asleep in a comfortable illusion, believing what you've always been told. Take the red pill, and you wake up to the truth, no matter how unsettling it is. Well, a lot of people online think they know the real history of Rome, but what they are really versed in is pop culture. Others think they've uncovered hidden truths about Rome and that they're seeing reality while everyone else is lost in fantasy. But here's the irony. These same people are the ones still stuck in the blue pill version of Rome. They've traded one set of myths for another, repeating simplistic, politically convenient narratives instead of looking at what actually happened. In this video, we're going to take the real red pill. The one based on evidence, primary sources, and actual historical scholarship. It's time to unplug from the false history of Rome and see it for what it really was. People living in their illusory pop culture bubble might say something like this. The Romans and Greeks were European.
State of Rome is the closest thing there ever was to a European civilization state.
Is it accurate to call the Romans European?
Yes, Doctor. But please proceed.
Seems so. I think a common view is that the Romans were these people who came from Italy, and they conquered a bunch of other people around them and ruled over them. Roman conquerors, European. Roman subjects, mixed. But that's not what happened.
Well, to be fair, if someone did say that, then yes, they would be wrong, but probably from a different reason from the one you are building up to. In the sense that depending on which tribe we are discussing as the conquered, not only they could also be European. If we are talking about the Gauls, for instance, I wouldn't describe them as mixed, I would describe them as European. Moreover, depending on which tribe we are talking about, they could also be quite ethnically, genetically and culturally homogeneous. The exception being people living in port cities in classical antiquity, which tended to be more diverse. It's case by case.
Throughout most of Roman history, a Roman was not someone who came from the city of Rome, or even who came from Italy. Are you ready for the red pill? Being Roman was not about where someone came from. There were Romans who had never lived anywhere near Rome, or even in Italy or in Europe. Being Roman was not about genetics. Yes, you could be considered Roman if both your parents were Roman citizens, but you also could become Roman if no one in your family had ever been Roman before. Being Roman was not about language. Latin was the dominant language, legally speaking, but many Romans had other primary languages. Being Roman was not purely about culture either. There were people who fully embraced Roman customs, but were not considered Roman, just as there were people with different cultural traditions that were considered Roman.
There is a lot to unpack here, so let's proceed in order. Personally, I find this very statement to be objectively incorrect, particularly in the way it was presented here. Let me elaborate. While it is true that people who weren't born in Italy could become Roman, of course, to become Roman means precisely to embrace the cultural and linguistic traditions of Rome. You cannot become Roman if you don't submit to the central authority, which is Rome in Italy, submit to the emperor's will, agree to pay taxes once again to Rome, accept their customs, in fact learn Latin if you want any hope for a career and social advancement for yourself and for your children. Therefore, even though the genetic component of it is not a requirement for you to become a Roman citizen, the cultural and linguistic ones absolutely are, as well as political and social submission. And mind you, on the linguistic note, sure, you're not going to forget your own language, although your kids might. To at least agree on some points, it's very likely that you will still preserve your own customs and religion, even if you become a Roman citizen, but only if you bend the knee to Rome and its dominating culture.
At its core, Roman identity was a legal status, a matter of citizenship. To ask who was a Roman is to ask a legal question, rather than an ethnic one. If you were a Roman citizen, you were Roman. And for those who held it, Roman citizenship was likely the most important part of their identity, more significant than ethnic or linguistic ties.
The fact that it's a legal status is absolutely correct, the professor is right, but precisely because it was a legal status, you could lose it if you didn't behave and submit to Roman power, once again. In other words, people who rebel lose citizenship, precisely due to the fact that being Roman is not necessarily, at a legal level, connected to any immutable characteristic. What this means, the result of that, is that you can lose citizenship and therefore stop being Roman if you don't obey and integrate within the core culture and authority which is in Rome. So, as long as you behave, you can be one of us, but you need to accept Roman military dominion, taxation, laws, culture, and lose your territories because we took them by force. Then you can become a citizen, then we consider you Roman as well. It's a conditional status.
And for those who held it, Roman citizenship was likely the most important part of their identity, more significant than ethnic or linguistic ties.
Is it more significant than ethnic or linguistic ties? Well, among the conquered, I wouldn't be so sure. If you were a Gaul or a German, even if you became Roman in the sense that they gave you citizenship, your ethnic and cultural ties with your people would have probably still been more important to you, and the citizenship grant was probably seen as a necessary evil by many of the conquered. After a few generations, it's very likely to think that that sentiment would go away. But still, the picture, Professor, you're appearing to be drawing here is one of a beautiful inclusivity that the Romans offered freely because that was the source of their strength. That's a fantasy. Rome was brutal, and its inclusivity, if you really want to use that term, included iron and blood for those who didn't submit.
Considering the Romans as a whole, it would be more appropriate to call them Mediterranean rather than European. While the city of Rome was located in Europe, the Roman Empire extended across 3 continents: Europe, North Africa, and Asia. The Mediterranean Sea was at the heart of their world, serving as the empire's primary conduit for trade, culture, and military power. The Romans themselves called it Mare Nostrum, our sea, reflecting their Mediterranean identity. They were not oriented towards Europe. They faced the broader Mediterranean world. Their economy relied on Mediterranean trade networks, their diet was based on Mediterranean staples, and their artistic, religious, and intellectual influences were shared with other Mediterranean cultures, such as the Greeks, Egyptians, and Phoenicians. The Roman Empire's ethnic composition consisted of peoples from Spain to Syria and Britain to North Africa. Many of Rome's key figures, emperors, generals, philosophers, were from regions outside of Europe.
This is the moment when this video entered debunking status. I'm sorry to say, Professor, with all due respect, but this is all complete, utter nonsense. Let me now annihilate all of these statements, one by one.
It would be more appropriate to call them Mediterranean rather than European.
The only cases in which Mediterranean wouldn't also mean European is if we started to talk about, for instance, countries in North Africa, the Middle East, that do face the Mediterranean Sea. So they are Mediterranean, but they are not European. But due to the fact that you're trying to use it and apply this to countries such as Italy and Greece, then European and Mediterranean do not become mutually exclusive. Rome is a European power that extended beyond its frontiers, reaching Africa and the Near East. This differentiation that you're trying to build is a construct. What you're doing is specifically semantics. You're using the term Mediterranean as the correct indicator for Rome and Greece, but in order to do so, you're counterposing it against European. The way you're trying to use it here, it's as if European only meant Central and Northern Europe, but that is incorrect. Southern Europe is part of Europe. Hence, the classifiers Mediterranean and European are not mutually exclusive.
The Roman Empire's ethnic composition consisted of peoples from Spain to Syria and Britain to North Africa.
Alright, let's have a look at the map that he's using now to strengthen his point. Let's define the colors. Already a cursory glance will show you that it is absolutely insane to try and remove the definition European from an empire that first and foremost stemmed in Italy, therefore in Europe, only because it extended to territories that, as we can see, still don't cancel out the European component of it. Do keep in mind that he's not trying to say that the Roman Empire was vast, he's trying to say European is not an apt descriptor. Also, I don't think it's by chance that he's using a zoomed in map. He is mentioning Britain as one of the territories, while he's not showing it, so how about we show it? And to that I would like to add the fact that numeric percentages of minorities within any given population cluster do not constitute the whole, nor do they fundamentally change the core culture and ethnic makeup of a given people or population. The extent of Roman colonies does not represent correctly the density of Roman citizenship granted onto the subjects. Not everyone on this map would have had Roman citizenship. And it is quite clear that the one single area with the highest density of citizenship would be Italy. Compare the relevance of the capital to that of some backwater small town in the far end of any of the points on this map, regardless of monumental population size differences, in order to argue that both are equally Roman and both contribute to the ethnic makeup of the empire is ludicrous.
Their diet was based on Mediterranean staples.
Factually incorrect. The Mediterranean staple when it comes to the diet only applied to Mediterranean areas. From Plutarch we learned that Caesar, passing through Mediolanum, modern-day Milan, was welcomed in the house of a certain Valerius Leo, a local nobleman, who offered the commander and his lieutenants asparagus seasoned with butter according to local customs, causing the disgusted reaction of some of Caesar's entourage. You see, in central southern Italy, butter was a cosmetic, not a condiment. Now, Valerius Leo evidently does not have a Mediterranean diet, but a Celtic one, yet he has a Roman name and was probably a citizen. Food, like other cultural elements, evidently varied from region to region, and even within the Italian peninsula itself, there were contexts that were less Mediterranean and more belonging to those areas of Europe that do not touch the Mediterranean.
They were not oriented towards Europe. They faced the broader Mediterranean world.
I'm sorry, what does it mean that they were not oriented towards Europe? Was Julius Caesar a Roman, sir? They went to Britain, they conquered Gaul, and I think with all the campaigns in Germania, it's pretty clear that if they had been able to, they would have absolutely included the entirety of Germany and Northern Europe. The Romans were omnidirectional. The idea that they didn't care about Europe is inconsistent with even the most superficial data analysis of the military campaigns alone. And that's without even mentioning international economics and foreign policy. What about the east of Europe and the campaigns thereafter? I really don't understand what you're basing this statement here, so I have to vehemently disagree.
Many of Rome's key figures, emperors, generals, philosophers, were from regions outside of Europe.
Here is a list of all 86 Roman emperors. In red, I've indicated every emperor who was born in Italy. In blue, every emperor who was born outside of Europe, even though some of these still come from an Italian colonial family. Green indicates all the emperors that were still born in Europe, outside of Italy, but still in Europe. Once you dig into the actual sources, you'll see that Europe remains categorically the main contributor here. Your point has been debunked.
Anyway, in antiquity, Europe was a geographical region, but was not seen as a unified cultural or political sphere.
In antiquity, Europe was not unified. Well, you forgot to say that neither was Africa or Asia, but you don't seem to have a problem using those terms.
The modern concept of Europe, as a distinct cultural entity, developed long after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This is not to say that European civilization wasn't founded on Roman civilization. It certainly was. And in most Western Civ courses, Rome, along with Greece and the Bible, are rightly considered the main foundations of Western civilization.
He's absolutely right here. 1 point to him. However, let's focus on what he said right before.
Anyway, in antiquity, Europe was a geographical region, but was not seen as a unified cultural or political sphere.
Alright, let's unpack this. Europe in antiquity was not a unified political sphere, and once again he's trying to use this to mean that then it's not apt to consider the Romans Europeans. Yet he didn't seem to have a problem with using the word Italy earlier on.
A Roman was not someone who came from the city of Rome, or even who came from Italy.
Which was also not a politically unified sphere in the same sense as modern Italy is. I see a double standard here, Professor. And this comes from someone who doesn't have any problem with using the word Italy in reference to the Romans, considering the fact that they did use the word Italia in a geographic sense. But since you are the one who's trying to say that Europe or European are not correct because they were not present in antiquity, then why are you not applying the same standard to the word Italy? And in fact, let me bring that one a step further. Why don't you have a problem with the plethora of modern words that you're going to use in the section about gender and identity, regardless of their modernity? Double standard.
But Western Civ came into existence after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West. The Roman Empire itself was no more a European civilization than Judea was.
Judea. Alright, well then I'm going to ask you a really tough question, Professor. Let's use your rules, but instead of trying to applying them on European powers, let's try and apply them on Asian and African kingdoms and empires. Are you telling me that we can take any African or Asian country and by simply adding a white ethnic minority within their population clusters and have them colonize a few areas in Europe, that would be enough for you to stop calling them an African or Asian civilization? Let's bring in some numbers. The African country with the largest population of European descendants, both numerically and proportionally, South Africa, where white South Africans number 4,504,252 people, making up 7.3% of South Africa's population, according to the 2022 South African census. Is South Africa in Africa, or should we consider it part of Europe due to the percentage of white people that live there? I'll be waiting for your answer, Professor. Didn't think so. What about the cultural significance? Religion is definitely part of culture. This chart shows the numbers of Muslims in Africa by number. Should we then start saying that Nigeria, for instance, is not to be considered an African country due to the clearly powerful cultural influence of a religion that did not originate in Africa, but in the Middle East? Just like the continental classifier, African applies to Nigeria regardless of cultural influences. Rome was European by any stretch of definition, and even more so because it was the Roman culture that was influencing the conquered territories.
Clearly true for the empire, but the Republic can be fairly described as European, I think. Caesar understood Gaulish governments as similar to the Roman, with senates and the like, but saw Eastern and Greek governments as alien.
Wow, 3 blue pills in one comment. Let's take them one by one. Can the Roman Republic be fairly described as European?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's see how far back in time we have to go for even us to consider the Romans as European.
During the reign of the first emperor of Rome, Augustus Caesar, the Roman historian Livy wrote about the foundations of Rome under its legendary founder Romulus. He describes a city made up of a diverse mix of peoples and backgrounds. According to his account, and others, Rome began as a fusion of Trojan and Latin peoples, producing Romulus, Remus, and Rome's first settlers. Well, guess where Troy is? Asia. Now, it is probably not true that Trojans were the ancestors of the Romans, but we can at least say that you'd never hear even the earliest Romans saying, "Yes, we are Europeans."
But we can at least say that you never hear even the earliest Asians saying, "Yes, we are Asian." But we can at least say that you never hear even the earliest Africans saying, "Yes, we are Africans." So yeah, you can say it, but it's completely pointless.
In fact, Rome consistently represented itself as having multi-ethnic origins, first in regard to the people of Italy, and then expanding outward.
Sure, you might say, the Romans wouldn't describe themselves as European, but we, in retrospect, can fairly call them that. The first Romans were a blend of Latins, Faliscans, Umbrians, Etruscans, and Sabines, all from Italy, yes.
GG, well played.
Pre-Roman Italy was home to at least 6 major languages, 3 religious systems, and dozens of distinct cultural groups. So far, yes, we are dealing with what we might call Europeans.
You can ditch the might, Professor.
But unlike Greek city-states, which restricted citizenship to exclusive family lineages, Rome, even during the Republic, opened up and expanded its citizen body over time.
North African elites gained Roman citizenship through alliances and diplomacy by the late 3rd to 2nd century, before the Christian era. This is during the time of the Republic.
The elites did. The elites. The rest of the population was not Roman. The rest of the population in Italy was Roman. So what is your point?
One of the earliest recorded non-European Roman citizens was Massinissa, king of Numidia, that's in modern Algeria and Tunisia. He was a Roman ally during the Second Punic War, and his descendants were granted Roman citizenship. The city of Kirta, modern Constantine, Algeria, had Roman citizens by the 2nd century before the Christian era, showing that North Africans were being integrated early on.
The extension of citizenship, while clearly indicating openness to elements of the aristocracy from other cultures, including African and Asian ones, brings with it cultural assimilation, which you consistently forget to mention. An example of that is that the first thing that accompanied access to citizenship was the assignment of a new name, which was Latin. For instance, Muttines, the Libo-Phoenician who betrayed Carthage by opening the gates of Agrigento to the Romans during the Second Punic War, was rewarded with citizenship and obtains, as a result, the name Marcus Valerius Motto.
Greek-speaking Anatolians from Asia Minor, modern Turkey, and Syrians from the Levant were among the earliest non-Europeans to gain citizenship. By the late 2nd century BCE, Roman politicians like Gaius Marius and Sulla began granting citizenship to Greek and Anatolian allies. The Lex Plautia Papiria in 89 BCE, passed during the Social War, allowed non-Italians, including Anatolians and Syrians, to gain Roman citizenship if they had settled in Italy. Julius Caesar was known for granting citizenship to Jewish allies, particularly those in Judea, Alexandria, and Asia Minor. Jewish leaders, such as Hyrcanus II, the high priest and ruler of Judea, received Roman citizenship from Caesar. All of this happened during the period of the Republic. Many Alexandrian Jews also held Roman citizenship by the time of Emperor Augustus, Julius Caesar's son.
Rome is certainly all-encompassing, and this is part of its nature from its origins, with the three original Roman tribes, Ramses, Titius, and Luceres, representing Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans, but at the same time, it marks with its cultural imprint those who become part of the Republic.
So the Romans of the Republic period, and particularly in the last couple centuries of the Republic, are not fairly described as European. Rather than rejecting outsiders, Rome succeeded precisely because it had the ability to incorporate different peoples and make them part of the Roman system. The adaptability that they had was a key to their strength. This inclusivity gave Rome access to a larger pool of resources and manpower, allowing it to outcompete rival powers like Carthage and Macedon, which maintained stricter ethnic divisions. Roman expansion was not about tolerance for its own sake. It was a strategic decision.
Finally, a point of agreement.
Designed to ensure military dominance. And when internal conflict arose over citizenship rights, Rome solved the problem by expanding citizenship, not restricting it.
Yeah, through a civil war, which erupted in Italy between 91 to 88 BC, just to convince the rest of the Romans to extend citizenship to the other Italic populations. A civil war, just for context.
Of course, citizenship continued to expand more during the empire. By the early 1st century of the Christian era, citizenship was being granted more widely to individuals in Egypt, North Africa, Syria, and Mesopotamia, making Roman an identity that transcended ethnic and geographic boundaries. The auxiliary military system also granted citizenship to non-European soldiers, including Berbers, Nubians, and Arabs, who served for 25 years. By the 2nd century, Romans of Spanish, Greek, African, and Gallic descent were leading armies, writing literature, and ruling as emperors.
Writing literature in what language, Dr. Miano? Latin.
And in 212, the Edict of Caracalla granted citizenship to nearly all free people in the empire. During the Republic and Empire, the Romans consisted of Europeans and non-Europeans, if we wanted to use those terms. While we're on the subject, the idea that Rome was once racially and culturally uniform, and that its decline was caused by increasing diversity, is another blue pill idea. The theory has been around for a long time. One of its most infamous proponents was Arthur de Gobineau, who argued that Rome fell because of race mixing, which supposedly weakened the Romans' ability to rule and conquer. However, this claim falls apart when tested against the historical evidence, as the Romans rejected racial or ethnic uniformity from early times. Far from being a homogeneous empire that fell apart due to diversity, Rome was a diverse empire that thrived because of its ability to integrate different peoples effectively. I don't say this for political reasons. This is what happened.
Gobineau's theories are obviously very dated and products of his time. But again, recognizing that Rome was not ethnically homogeneous in all of its areas and that it certainly did not collapse due to ethnic miscegenation does not equate to want to deny its Greco-Latin connotation. It is a non sequitur.
To be clear here, the Romans were pragmatic rather than ideologically committed to diversity. While they generally allowed local customs to persist, because suppressing them would be bad for tax collection, this does not mean they were free of prejudice. In fact, Romans often expressed bigoted views about foreigners, even after granting them citizenship. Writers complained about the presence of outsiders in Rome sometimes in deeply xenophobic terms. However, these complaints never stopped the expansion of citizenship, because incorporating new peoples into the Roman system was always more beneficial than excluding them. Despite their prejudices, the Romans repeatedly expanded their definition of who could be Roman, incorporating more peoples into their system as needed. So, the next time someone claims that Rome fell because it became too diverse, remind them that Rome's success was built on diversity.
Other Roman writers often stereotype the Gauls as barbaric.
The Gauls rush into battle with a reckless bravery, trusting in their size and strength rather than tactics. They fight naked, trusting in their courage rather than in armor.
Why is Polybius getting the troll voice now?
For who does not know that the Gauls, those rude and barbaric peoples, were once the terror of Rome?
Yes, many Roman writers, including Caesar, Cicero, Livy, Tacitus, referred to the Gauls as barbarians.
The question of whether or not the Romans would see the forms of governments of the Gauls as closer to Roman ones and the Greek and Asian ones as alien, I think has been deliberately presented in a simplistic and caricatured manner here, to strike at those who depict Rome as something generally closer to the northern world than to the Asian or African one. Now, without doubt, the Gauls, until they become Romanized, are perceived by the Romans as barbarian and alien. But focusing on their political system, it is certainly presented as more elementary in the sources than the Roman one. However, it is recognized that the Gauls are managed by structures referred to as senates, assemblies of elders, which in origin was ancestrally the same as the Roman Senate, and they have magistracies, not absolute monarchies, when the Romans tell us about them. We do need to give credit where credit is due to the quote-unquote roll commons, close quotes. Therefore, certainly the Gauls are perceived as animalistic, inconsistent and immature until they become Romanized, but the forms of government, although presented as simple, are closer to Roman sentiment compared to the monarchies of the diadochi.
Note how the Roman poet Horace presents the Greeks as the civilizers of the Latins. Indeed, the Romans respected Greek learning, government, and culture. They saw Greek institutions as refined and advanced, not alien. And that makes sense, because Rome had been interacting with Greek and Eastern states for centuries.
Yes, the Roman general fascination with the Greeks is correct, so I agree with that. But the fact, Dr. Miano, that now you're speaking so positively of the Greeks truly makes me understand why you spent so long to try and say the Mediterranean cultures are not European, because you do not want to speak positively about anything European, clearly for political reasons.
This social media post reflects modern misconceptions rather than historical reality. It doesn't reflect what ancient sources actually say. The reality is that Rome saw Greece and the East as sophisticated, but Gaul as alien and uncivilized. Caesar respected Greek political systems far more than he did the Gauls.
Are you getting upset listening to this? Does it bother you? The Matrix is a comfortable world to be in. I didn't say the red pill felt good. Do you want to be free from bondage, to escape the prison of your mind that you cannot smell or taste or touch? We're just getting started. Let me show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
The next section is going to be Dr. Miano's best effort at trying to remove the word white from any possible description of the Romans in the past. And of course, as you would expect, he never has a problem with words such as black, brown, and the likes. Only with white. Don't you dare describe the Romans as white, but of course feel free to describe the Zulu as black, that's not a problem. Full of misconceptions, and I would completely consider it a massive blue pill.
Ancient Romans from Latium region, founders of Rome as kingdom, republic, and finally as empire, were obviously white Europeans and belonged to the same DNA cluster as modern Iberians, North Italians, and Southern French. Everyone in Rome was white or white adjacent, Arnav. The German barbarians and North Africans at that time were white like the Romans. There were not hordes of blacks or browns in Rome, just different nations of the white race. Franks, Germanics, etc.
Okay, so let's talk about skin color. According to this one guy, everyone in the empire was pretty much white. These interpretations of history project modern racial categories onto the ancient world, assuming that the way we classify people today must have been just as relevant in the past. Point number 1. There is no universal, timeless system for dividing people into groups. Different cultures emphasize different traits as important. The modern concept of whiteness emerged largely in the 18th and 19th centuries in the context of European colonialism and associated racial classifications. That's relatively recent. If today's racial categories are fixed and biologically meaningful, and not social constructs that change over time, then we'd expect the Romans to have the same view. And they don't. That alone should be enough to disprove the idea that these modern categories are universal and timeless.
While I agree with the professor that the first commentator is clearly extremely ignorant, he literally removed Central and Southern European from the Romans, which is nonsense. I've already debunked Nordicism in connection with Rome. With that being said, what you're now debunking was not his point. So you're building a strawman and attacking the strawman instead. He never said that ethnicity was a monolith or that our current modern usage of the term white should be exactly the same as that used linguistically by the Romans. So I don't understand why you are presenting that one as if it was his argument. It was not.
Societies create their own definitions of identity, belonging, and social hierarchy. They don't inherit them from us in the future. The Romans did not divide themselves into white and non-white. You won't find it in any of their writings.
This is wrong. The Romans absolutely referred to themselves as white, precisely as white. Now, it's one of two things. Either, Dr. Miano, you know this, or you don't know this, in which case I'm wondering why you're making such a categorical statement if you haven't investigated the sources. The first and easier example of that specific usage of that word in classical antiquity is Lucian of Samosata, a Greek language author who lived in the 2nd century AD. He says, if an Ethiopian who had never traveled or seen different men like us were to categorically state in an assembly of Ethiopians that there exists in the world no men who are white or blonde, nothing but black men, would his statement be accepted. Close quotes. It is interesting that in these writings that are specifically dating to the imperial Rome, there is the presence of 3 distinct human phenotypes: black, white, which can also be translated as luminous, and blonde, also translatable as gold. So, we have an author within the empire who indicates 3 different racial types, black, white, and blonde. It is clear that a phenotypic and racial difference was perceived not only between black people and white people, but also between white people, which for the Romans and Greeks would have been them, and blondes, meaning Celtic and Germanic types. It is clearly different from modern racial categories, but it's still a racial category, and they absolutely use the term white to define them.
Point number 2. We should consider how the Romans themselves classified people. Ancient Greek and Roman writers were aware of differences in skin color, but their primary concerns when identifying people were language, customs, and religion. For Romans, legal status and cultural affiliation mattered far more than skin color. Ethnicity, defined in terms of ancestry and regional origin, was sometimes relevant, but even then, skin color was only a minor aspect of identity. And the fact that the Romans found it far easier to integrate Egyptians than they did to govern Britain or Germany demonstrates that they didn't view all so-called white groups as naturally compatible.
Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with describing ancient societies with modern terminology. It is, after all, how we can communicate in ways that people can best understand.
As long as you don't call Roman and Greek European, because that's where you draw the line, right?
But there are better and worse modern terms, and white is just an all-around poor choice. Not only because it misrepresents how the Romans saw themselves, but also...
So the real question is, what do you mean by white, Professor? Are you white? Am I white? Are Irish people white? What is white? If by white you only mean someone of Western European descent, and you don't include Southern Europeans, for instance, then you're applying a completely different term and meaning to the word white that I have. Hence, before we can continue this discussion on whether the Romans were white or not, spoiler alert, they were, we would first have to indicate, without any possible misunderstanding, what you mean by white.
Point number 3. The Roman Empire spanned Europe, North Africa, Asia Minor, and the Middle East, incorporating a vast array of ethnic groups with a huge range of skin tones and physical features. A recent genetic study has shown that even the capital city of Rome during the heyday of the Roman Empire was composed of people from all corners of the empire. After the empire split in the 4th century, that is when the city's population went into decline and the European population of Rome went back up. Hey, we don't have to speculate about what Romans looked like. They literally painted us a picture. Let's look at the frescoes of Pompeii.
Yeah, let's. Personally, this very image, I see white people, but I don't know if you're going to try to gaslight us to tell us that those are Africans at this point.
A Roman town in Campania that was buried by Mount Vesuvius in the year 79. This site is especially valuable for understanding early imperial Roman Italy because it preserves artwork from before the wider ethnic mixing of later centuries. And the town was settled by Roman citizens, including veterans of Sulla's army, making it a strong representation of Italy's population at that time. And what do we find? These paintings depict figures with a variety of skin tones, with women generally appearing paler than men. This reflects a Roman beauty ideal, inherited from Greek and Egyptian art, where lighter skin on women was associated with wealth and refinement, while tanned skin on men suggested outdoor labor, military service, or masculinity. If we focus on male depictions, which are likely a better representation of natural skin tone, we see a full range of Mediterranean complexions, from fair to deep brown.
By your own words, women have lighter skin because they stay home. Men have tanned, you said, because they work in the field or military service. Hence, by your own definition and explanation, women and their skin tone is a better representation of the general skin tone, simply because the tanner skin on the men is a result of sun exposure, but if they didn't go out, then their skin would be the same as that of the women, just as a matter of deductive logic. Also, as you notice, he's saying basically they're not white, they are Mediterranean, but yet, Professor, I'm a Mediterranean and my skin is white. So where are we going with this?
Using the Fitzpatrick scale, a modern classification of human skin color, Roman frescoes provide examples of nearly every shade within the light to dark human spectrum.
And the only ones that don't tan because they sunburn are number 1. Those are, however, not the only ones that we consider white.
If we expand our focus beyond Italy, the variation of skin color increases even more. A great source for this is Egyptian mummy portraits, a funerary tradition blending Greek, Roman, and Egyptian artistic styles. These portraits, painted on wooden panels placed over mummies, date from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE, overlapping perfectly with Roman rule in Egypt. They're useful because they depict individuals with high accuracy, including their skin tones. Many subjects are clearly marked as Roman citizens, as indicated by their clothing, togas, tunics with clavis stripes. This portrait shows a man with a medium brown complexion, short curly hair, and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothing marks him as a Roman citizen. This woman has light olive skin and wears elaborate jewelry. Her hairstyle is Roman, and her clothing follows Roman fashion, showing how local elites adopted Roman identity while retaining their own cultural traits. This portrait features a young man with tightly coiled hair, dark skin, and a solemn expression. His white tunic with a red clavis stripe marks him as a Roman citizen. What do these portraits show us? A wide range of skin tones from light olive to deep brown, different hair textures including straight, curly, and tightly coiled hair. It tells us that despite their physical differences, these individuals were all Romans, not because of their appearance, but because of their citizenship and legal status. But what about all these beautiful white statues? Maybe this will be news to some, but these statues, now bare, were once painted. We know that because some of the paint is still on some of them.
That's correct, and I have an entire video dedicated to the painted statues. Link in the description.
So the idea that Romans were white is simply not supported by evidence. It distorts history and ignores what the Romans themselves actually recorded about their society. It's a blue pill. The overwhelming weight of archaeological, artistic, and literary evidence makes one thing clear. There were black Romans, there were Middle Eastern Romans, there were North African Romans, there were Romans from Spain, Gaul, Anatolia, all looking different from one another. All of this is undisputed in historical scholarship. The only place where resistance to this idea persists is in popular culture, often for ideological reasons rather than based on evidence.
Now someone might object and say, but the post says it was the founders of Rome who were white. It wasn't referring to the citizens of the empire. I mean, when most people think of Rome, they think of the Roman Empire, but okay. Yeah, if you want to make a movie about the early days of Rome, before it amounted to anything, then it would be appropriate and historically accurate to cast white actors. But notice here that he's giving credit to these white people for the creation of the kingdom, republic, and empire. The reality is that everyone who became Roman over the centuries contributed to the creation of the empire, not just the first few generations. Saying that the original white people are to have the credit is said for political, not historical reasons. Les Paul, the creator of the electric guitar, was a great man, but are we to give all credit to him for the accomplishments of Eddie Van Halen or Prince?
Certainly, starting from the late Republic with the entry of North Africa into the Roman sphere of influence, there could have been individuals who were black Roman citizens. For instance, a Melanogetulian nobleman or a Asphodelodian nobleman, etc., who had been granted citizenship. But we are looking at special cases. It is very likely that during the Imperial Age this percentage may have intensified. And while it is certainly correct to emphasize that there were Roman citizens of many different phenotypes, and that phenotype was not normally discriminating when it comes to the possibility of receiving citizenship, it is still a fact that the majority of Roman citizens would have been white. Now, is it important? No, not particularly, but since we are reaching a level of absurdity on this video in the way this question is addressed, then we have to answer it properly. The next section focuses entirely on gender, identity, sexuality, but considering the fact that this video is already extremely long, I'll have to make a separate debunking video to address it. Unfortunately, Dr. Miano, what seems to have happened here is that throughout your intense production of this video, your focus has clearly not been looking for the truth, but to replace a blue pill with another blue pill. You went out of your way to debunk the Nordicists, the white supremacists, while at the same time using every possible buzzword to become amicable with the other side of the political spectrum, that you ended up swapping myths for other myths. This is why, regardless of the production quality of your video, when it comes to finding the truth, it was unfortunately a catastrophic endeavor. And to that I say again, I am a Mediterranean. This is my side of the world. Feel free to wage your war against the alt-right, white supremacists and racists all you want. Just don't use the truth about our side of history and culture as ammo. We are not your ammo for your political endeavors. I think you put it best yourself, Doctor, and if I may, I'll use your very own words to define your video.
They've traded one set of myths for another, repeating simplistic, politically convenient narratives instead of looking at what actually happened.
Are you getting upset listening to this? Does it bother you?